Chapter 1. The Arrival. The sun burned mercilessly over Madrid's streets in July 1963. Francisco López stepped off the train at Atocha station, his worn leather briefcase in hand and a cigarette dangling from his lip. He was 32, with a face that had seen too much, scars across his cheek from a knife fight in Barcelona, eyes reflecting a mix of hunger and determination. The Franco regime ruled the country with an iron fist, but beneath the surface, organized crime boiled. The mafia, or La Familia, as they called themselves, had taken deep root in Spain after the war. They smuggled cigarettes, liquor, and drugs from Gibraltar to the Costa del Sol, and no one touched them without paying the price. Francisco wasn't here to sightsee. He was a small-time dealer from Valencia, or so he claimed. In reality, he was an infiltrator for the Guardia Civil, sent to dismantle the network led by the infamous Diego El Toro Ramirez. Ramirez had built his empire on blood and bribes, and his men controlled the ports in Malaga and Madrid's black market. Francisco felt his pulse pounding hard in his chest as he stepped onto the dusty platform. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the scent of fresh bread from a nearby panaderia. He knew one mistake could cost him his life. He took a taxi to a cheap hotel in the Lavapiés neighborhood. The room was cramped, with peeling wallpaper and a fan that creaked like a dying cat. Francisco lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. His mission: get close to Ramirez through a contact named Maria, a waitress at a bar rumored to be the mafia's eyes and ears. He felt a shiver down his spine. Maria was beautiful, dangerous, and perhaps loyal to the wrong side. Evening fell, and Francisco dressed in a simple suit. He went to Bar El Toro, a smoky joint filled with workers and shady figures. Music from a gramophone played flamenco, and the air was heavy with tobacco and sweat. There she was, Maria, with dark hair cascading in curls over her shoulders, serving beers with a smile that could melt steel. Francisco sat at the bar and ordered a brandy. "You look like a man with secrets," she said, leaning forward, her eyes boring into his. "Everyone has secrets in this country," he replied with a crooked smile. His heart thumped. This was the beginning. Chapter 2. The Alliance. The days blurred into a whirlwind of meetings and whispers. Francisco had earned Maria's trust by helping her with a drunken customer who got too handsy. She introduced him to the mafia's lower circles, small-time smugglers who transporting goods in trucks through the dead of night. They met in an old warehouse outside Madrid, where the air reeked of oil and cigarette butts. The walls were covered in maps of smuggling routes, and the men sat around a table with pistols within reach. "A new guy?" growled one of them, a stocky man named Pablo, with a tattoo of a bull on his arm, Ramirez's symbol. "He's reliable," Maria said, placing her hand on Francisco's shoulder. Her touch sent electric shocks through him. Was she genuine or playing a game? Francisco proved himself quickly. They sent him on a job. Pick up a shipment of cigarettes from a boat in Valencia. The night was black as ink as he drove along the coastal road, the wind howling mixed with the crash of waves. He felt sweat trickling down his back. At the pier, two men with rifles waited. "Password?" hissed one. "El Toro rules," Francisco answered, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. They loaded the crates into the car, but suddenly sirens wailed in the distance. Guardia Civil. Francisco floored the accelerator, tires spinning on the gravel. Shots echoed in the night, a bullet shattering the rearview mirror into shards. He swerved onto a side road, heart in his throat, and hid in an olive grove. His breath came in gasps. He'd made it barely. Back in Madrid, he was rewarded with a meeting with Ramirez himself. El Toro was a giant, with broad shoulders and a scar over his eye. They sat in a luxurious villa on the city's outskirts, surrounded by guards. "You've got guts, kid," Ramirez said, pouring wine, "but guts aren't enough. Loyalty is." Francisco nodded, but inside he seethed. He'd seen the mafia's victims, poor families extorted, rivals murdered in alleys. Maria sat beside him, her leg brushing his under the table. Was it a signal or a trap? The tension built. Francisco was sent on more jobs, each time closer to the core. One night, after a successful smuggling run, Maria kissed him in the shadows of the warehouse. "Be careful," she whispered. "They suspect everyone." Chapter 3, The Betrayal. Autumn 1963 arrived with chilly winds. Francisco had gathered evidence, names, routes, bribed cops. He sent coded messages to his superiors via a hidden drop box. But the mafia was clever. One day, during a meeting in a basement in Toledo, he felt eyes on him. Pablo stared suspiciously. "Why do you ask so much about Ramirez's plans?" Francisco laughed it off, but his pulse raced. That night he awoke to a knock on his hotel door. It was Maria, her face pale. "They know," she whispered. "Someone's betrayed you." "Who?" Francisco grabbed her arms. "Is it you?" She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "No, I love you. But Pablo saw you talking to a cop." They fled into the night, through Madrid's labyrinthine streets. Behind them, footsteps echoed, shouts rang out. A car chased them, headlights blinding. Francisco pulled Maria into an alley, heart pounding like a drum. They hid behind dumpsters, holding their breath. The car passed, but the tension was unbearable. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a threat. They reached a safe spot, an old church. There Maria revealed the truth. She was Ramirez's daughter, but she hated her father's life. She wanted out, and Francisco was her chance. But now they were both hunted. Ramirez had put a bounty on their heads. The next day, they planned their escape. Francisco contacted the Guardia Civil for backup, but during the meeting in a park, chaos erupted. Mafia men attacked, bullets whizzing through the air. Francisco fired back, a round whistling past his ear. Maria screamed as Pablo grabbed her. "You traitor!" he roared. Francisco fought, knocking down a guard, but Pablo escaped with Maria. The pain in his chest was worse than any wound. He was alone now, with the mafia on his heels. Chapter 4, The end. Winter approached, and Francisco hid in the mountains outside Madrid. He lived on bread and water, plotting his revenge. Ramirez had called a big meeting in Malaga, a major smuggling operation. It was his chance. He infiltrated the port disguised as a loader. The night was stormy, waves slamming against the pier like angry fists. The scent of salt and fish filled the air. Francisco sneaked into the warehouse where the meeting was held. There stood Ramirez, surrounded by men, Maria bound to a chair. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Let her go," Francisco shouted, drawing his pistol. Chaos broke out. Shots echoed, men fell. Francisco ducked behind crates, sweat mixing with blood from a graze. Ramirez laughed. "You're brave but stupid." They grappled, Ramirez's strength against Francisco's speed. A knife flashed, slicing through the air. Francisco dodged, grabbed Ramirez's arm and twisted. A shot rang out, Pablo dropped dead. Maria freed herself, grabbed a pistol and fired at her father. "It's over," she screamed. Ramirez fell, blood staining the floor red. The Guardia Civil stormed in, sirens blaring. Francisco and Maria embraced amid the chaos, hearts beating in unison. At dawn, they stood on the beach, the sun rising over the horizon. The mafia's grip was broken, at least for now. But Francisco knew, in Spain under Franco, new threats always lurked. Yet, with Maria by his side, he felt hope. They walked toward the future, leaving the blood behind. Epilogue. In the years following the chaos in Malaga, Francisco and Maria lived in exile, hidden in the mountains of France. The mafia's shadows faded, but the memories remained. They built a new life, free from blood and lies, yet they knew the price of freedom was eternal vigilance. In the sunset's glow, they promised each other, no more secrets, only the hope of tomorrow.